Some people are just what we Chinese call picky or stubborn. They rather lose hundreds of thousands than use their logic to think through. Even when I want to help them for free, they still don't want to listen. I'm talking about this person I know. Let's call him Mr. Lim. Mr. Lim owns a flat that's over 40 years now. For the past few years, I kept wanting to let him know that there is a way for him to trade his old flat for a much newer one without the need to top up a single dollar. But he just didn't want my help. I know I'm a property agent, but what I'm doing isn't to make money from him by selling his flat. In fact, I just wanted to assure him that he won't need to fork out a single extra dollar from his bank to pay me. Still, he won't even want to listen. So no choice. I'm sure that in a few years when the property market changes and the flat gets even older, he has got absolutely no other option than to stay in that flat until the end. Tiki. As Singapore's HDB flats age, many owners in mature estates, even new towns, are beginning to face a stark reality like what I mentioned earlier. Their flats are now 40 years or older. And you know what? This milestone brings up important questions like the flat's future value, its livability, and financial uncertainty to move on to the next property. The question now is, should they continue to live in these flats for sentimental reasons? Or is it time to do something about it and cash out while they still can? I'm making this video not because I didn't have the opportunity to talk to Mr. Lim, who is very likely to make a potentially $500,000 mistake. No, it's probably too late for him already. This video is really for you. If you own a 40-year-old flat and you don't have the intention to stay in it until its lease ends, and no, I'm not only referring to those aging flats in mature estates like Toa Payoh, Bedok, Queenstown, or Ang Mo Kio, where many of the flats are over 50 years old now. I'm talking about newer neighborhoods like Serangoon, Jurong, or even Tampines, like where I am currently. Yes, even in Tampines New Town, there are many of these flats which has crossed the 35 to 40-year-old mark already. So in this video, I'll just be talking about two main things. What's the problem with 40-year-old flats and what options do you have? So first up, the problem with old flats, I need to begin by sharing the looming issue, lease decay. Now you know that all HDB flats in Singapore are sold on 99-year leases. So a 40-year-old flat has just 59 years left, which means it's entering a phase where something called lease decay starts to affect not just value but also you, the owner's financial options. Because as a flat ages beyond the 40-year mark, three important consequences begin to kick in. First, diminishing buyer pool. Take it from me that most buyers are reluctant to buy older flats, especially those with less than 60 years of lease remaining. Sure, there are a few who love the bigger space or the location, but it's very difficult to get these buyers, especially if there are so many units for sale at where your flat is. The reason is because CPF usage becomes restricted when the flat becomes old. CPF rules state that the remaining lease of the property at the point of purchase must cover the youngest buyer until he turns 95 years old. What it means is this: if the flat is 44 years old and only has 55 years of lease left, the youngest buyer cannot be older than 41 years old, because in 55 years' time, the buyer would be 96 years of age. Unless the buyers are willing to fork out cash and use less CPF to finance your flat, the pool of would-be buyers will be much smaller. Second consequence of old flats, financing limitations. Banks may not offer a full loan for older flats, especially those nearing or below the 50-year lease mark. So the only options for those buying 50-year-old flats is to pay in full or get a HDB loan. But then, CPF usage is reduced from what I discussed earlier. So this further reduces the number of potential buyers, which I dare say many of which depend on getting loans to afford their homes. Third consequence, and it's something rather technical that many people don't know about. It's called the CPF Accrued Interest trap. I don't know how to simply explain what CPF Accrued Interest is. You just need to know that when you sell your HDB flat, you're required to refund your CPF principal plus accrued interest. Accrued interest is the interest you otherwise would earn if you didn't use your CPF to pay for your loan. So for example, in 2005, for your 300,000 flat purchase, you now pay with 100,000 of CPF and took a further 200,000 loan. And now, 20 years later, in 2025, you finally pay all off. The principal is $300,000, but the accrued interest would be $192,000 because this is the amount you would have earned in your CPF ordinary account after 20 years at 2.5% if you didn't use that $300,000 in the first place. Yes, this is not the interest paid to the loan, but the interest you lost in your CPF ordinary account. So, when you sell your flat, the same one you bought for $300,000, you need to refund $300,000 plus $192,000 or $492,000 altogether back into your CPF account. Most people who sold their flats when they're newer would be alright because they would have sold at higher than this figure, considering the price of flats now. But for those who are selling the older flats, especially when the flats are 50 years old, they might be in trouble. For them, they may end up with very little cash after the sale or worse, unable to repay their CPF fully. This means the flat becomes a negative sale. And you know what? In the worst case scenario, in theory, if your flat's 99 years of lease is up in the future and you've ever used CPF to fund your flat's purchase, you better have a lot of cash to top back up to your CPF account because you would have gotten back zero. Honestly, this reason alone should convince you not to hold on to your flat beyond 50 years if you had ever used CPF to fund its purchase. So, those are the consequences of lease decay. Now, at this point, I guess there will be two groups of viewers. One might be surprised by the things I share, that they didn't know such things like the CPF accrued interest. To this group, you're welcome. But there will be another group which will say that I'm fear-mongering, especially since I'm a property agent and I do this to scare them to sell their property. You really don't have to believe me, and it's perfectly fine for me that you stay in your property until the lease is up. And even if you're convinced to sell now, you don't have to engage me to sell your 40-year-old flat. This video is meant to share lesser-known facts with everyone. So all I ask for is a like to this video and also a subscribe to my channel. This will cost you nothing, but it will mean a lot to me. But of course, if you wish to have a chat with me about your flat, feel free to drop me a WhatsApp. Anyway, now that you're aware of what happens after your flat turns 40 or beyond, allow me to share some real-life examples to further illustrate my point. Consider the current market for a 50-plus-year-old flat in Toa Payoh, which is this 3-room flat with 52 years of lease left, recently transacted at around $250,000. By the way, this is near my parents' place in the past. Now, in a newer town like Punggol or Sengkang, a similar sized flat with 80 years left would go for $400,000 to $450,000. Anyway, after refunding CPF accrued interest, many sellers of those older Toa Payoh flats would end up with cash proceeds of under $100,000. Honestly, that's not enough for those newer flats in Punggol or Sengkang. In fact, that amount is barely enough for a down payment on even a smaller property, let alone having enough for retirement planning. In other words, by the time your flat hits the 50-year mark, you may no longer have meaningful options left but to just stay until the lease is up, and then worry later about the problem of refunding the CPF principal and accrued interest. Hopefully, you might say what some other older folks tell me, that by then, they won't be around anymore to face that problem. Still not convinced that keeping ownership of an aging flat is not the best idea? Well, it's actually more than just a financial risk, because beyond monetary concerns, living in older flats comes with other drawbacks that worsen with time, such as wear and tear of the building. Needless for me to say, older flats tend to experience issues like pipe leaks and drainage problems, cracking tiles and structural wear, outdated electrical wiring, and more frequent lift breakdowns, especially in low-rise blocks without modernization. Also, you'll be facing obsolete design and layout because many flats built in the 1970s to 1980s have long corridors with poor privacy, poorer natural lighting, smaller bathrooms, and the common bathroom being in the kitchen instead of nearer to the common bedrooms. Third, and this could be a more major problem, future uncertainty of upgrading and redevelopment. While many owners hope for SERS or selective en-bloc redevelopment scheme where you will probably be given enough compensation for a new flat somewhere. But in reality, SERS is rare. Only 5% of flats have been selected since it began. Nowadays, the government has pivoted towards VERS or Voluntary Early Redevelopment Scheme, and details are unclear, and compensation is expected to be lower than SERS. So if your flat isn't chosen for SERS or even VERS, you are stuck riding out lease decay with ever-diminishing returns. So now, let us recap by exploring the option, or at least with you considering selling your 40-year-old flat. Firstly, you will very likely get a larger buyer pool. With more than 60 years left, your flat still qualifies for full CPF usage and bank financing, making it attractive to a larger pool of buyers. Second, and needless to say, you will definitely get a higher sales price. Market data consistently shows that flats start depreciating more sharply once the lease drops below 60 years. Selling now helps you avoid falling off that cliff. Third, after selling, you get a choice of either right-sizing or relocating. With good proceeds, you can either buy a smaller resale flat in a younger estate, move to a newer BTO flat with 99-year lease reset, or even just move to areas with greater appreciation potential. But most importantly, for almost all of us who are privileged to own a HDB flat, you can cash out for other goals. Selling early allows you to reinvest your net profits in a safer, income-generating instruments like bonds, equities, and REITs. Help your children with their education or home down payment, or even build an emergency fund in case of retrenchment or medical issues. But still, you ask, why not just stay on? Some homeowners may think, why sell? I can just stay here till the end, especially those who have sentimental or emotional attachment to the flat. Oh, it's walking distance to the MRT. No, I won't sell. It's next to the mall. I've been staying here for 30 years already. I know all my neighbors here. That may be fine for those with no plans to move. But you have to consider this. What if you need to downsize for medical or mobility reasons later? What if you become older and you want to move closer to your children in the future? What if you need emergency cash but can't sell the flat? Honestly, staying put may provide short-term stability and comfort, but it limits future flexibility. And to me, that's a major risk. So, coming back to Mr. Lim, remember that person whom I wanted to help? Let me use his case as a case study here. And also something I said earlier, that there's no need for him to fork out a single dollar from his bank even to pay my commission. So Mr. Lim has a 42-year-old 4-room flat that's near the MRT and more, a major plus point for his flat. And currently, asking prices are around $640,000 in his area. If he had sold, he could move to a similar sized 4-room flat in a newer town at $580,000. But this new flat is only 20 years old. But since he doesn't want to sell now, we assume a hypothetical situation where he finally decides to sell 8 years later when the flat is 50 years old. By then, the flat's value would probably drop to $550,000 and the new town flat would appreciate further to $630,000. Well, it's still not too late, but with this scenario, he still needs to take a loan or top up in cash for a newer flat. Not impossible, but why make his life difficult in the future when there's a solution today that requires no further cash outlay? So now, another situation. Suppose he agrees to sell today at $620,000 and I sell for him at $640,000 because of the videos and staging I do for him and the good location of his place. He pays out his remaining loan of $70,000, refunds his CPF principal used and accrued interest of $147,000. He still has cash proceeds of $423,000. With all this cash and the $147,000 of CPF he has, he can now pay $500,000 and comfortably take on just $80,000 of loan for 10 years, which works out to be only $750 of monthly installment. You know what's best? He still has $40,000 to $50,000 of cash after some basic renovations and even my commission. And most importantly, his new home is now 20 years younger. Sure, this scenario may not be for everyone, considering you probably have to move to a new town that's not as central. And maybe you won't have the MRT or mall next to you. It's okay if you can afford to stay at your current place and you're committed to stay all the way. But if your logic is telling you to prepare for the better financial future and you are willing to sacrifice a little bit of convenience today, perhaps you should start planning to sell your flat that's 35 to 45 years old. So, what should you do if you are finally convinced? First, you need to check your lease balance. This can be done on the HDB website or My Property portal. Second, you need to log into your CPF account to check how much CPF you will need to refund upon the sale. Then, get a valuation to check recent transactions in your block or nearby units. After that, plan your next move and explore right-sizing, purchasing newer flats in non-mature towns, or perhaps even renting at first with a portion of your proceeds and wait for the property fever to cool down. Or if you find all this too difficult, you can just work with your favorite property agent. I'm here too for you if you need me. So really, your 40-year-old flat has served you well. Yes, it's been your home, your shelter, your comfort zone. But smart homeowners face facts. Lease decay is real and it's accelerating. But at least today you have options if you act earlier. Don't be picky. Holding on out of sentiment may cost you the chance to secure your financial future. One more thing, in a softening resale market this year, timing is everything. Sell too late and your flat may become impossible to offload without financial loss. But if you sell now, you could walk away with meaningful cash that supports your retirement or future plans. So don't wait until your flat is worth less than your CPF refund. Once again, let me know if you need help with your calculations. Lastly, like and subscribe.